US President Joe Biden will be leaving office in under 2 weeks, and a large part of his legacy will be the almost unlimited financial, military, and political support he lent to Israel's genocide in Gaza. Now, some had hoped that an incoming Donald Trump presidency would end that support in favor of American isolationism. I don't know why they would have expected that, to be honest. But the future president has indicated he has a different plan. Standing next to his envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, Trump issued a threat.
If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
Can you elaborate?
And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say anymore, but that's what it is. And they should have given them back a long time. They should have never taken them. There should have never been the attack of October 7th. People forget that.
He's talking about the hostages there. If they don't return the hostages, all hell will break loose. And that's not the first time Trump has used that phrase, all hell will break loose. He used a similar wording less than a month after he won last year's presidential election. It's a strange and potentially disruptive intervention to make when ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas are underway in Qatar. And Biden, of course, is desperate to get some kind of deal before he leaves office. And earlier this week, Hamas agreed to the release of 34 hostages in exchange for a prisoner release from Israel, as well as troops withdrawals from parts of Gaza. That deal hasn't been confirmed by Israel. I don't really take any of these stories about ceasefire negotiations particularly seriously anymore. It's a bit Groundhog Day, isn't it? The more striking thing, though, that Trump said there, or the more striking way in which it conflicts with reality, is that Gaza already is hell. Huh? That was footage of Israel's ongoing efforts to flatten northern Gaza's Jabalia refugee camp. It's part of Israel's ongoing campaign to ethnically cleanse the northern parts of the Strip, forcing Palestinians into the south, where they're told they'll be safer. That's a promise that has never been kept. On Tuesday night, Israel's assault on the south of the enclave continued, with strikes targeting the Al-Mawasi area of Khan Yunis. In the area which is designated a safe zone by the Israeli military, a drone struck tents housing civilians. And according to health officials, 7 Palestinian civilians were killed, including 5 children. One witness reports that they saw a health worker carrying the body parts of a child in a box to the hospital. That was just one strike that took place on Tuesday. According to health officials, a total of nearly 49 Palestinians were killed across the Strip overnight, so in the last 24 hours. And of course, overall, nearly 46,000 Palestinians are confirmed to have been killed since Israel's war began 15 months ago. The real number could be much higher. The number injured is now approaching 110,000. And while Trump is threatening Gaza with hell, Israel appears to be busily carving up the Strip. According to researchers Hugh Lovett and Mohammed Shahada at the European Council on Foreign Relations, Israel is carrying out a so-called 5 fingers strategy to the fragmentation of Gaza. This map shows the 4 current and developing Israeli-controlled corridors in Gaza. Those are the 4 lines passing roughly east to west along the length of the Strip. According to Lovett and Shahada, the aim is to fragment Gaza into small, isolated and overcrowded enclaves. And then the researchers say this: these corridors require the large-scale demolition of Palestinian homes, mass displacement, and the construction of new Israeli infrastructure, including water, sewage and electricity networks, and widening roads to potentially serve future Israeli settlements, according to an investigation by Israel's Haaretz newspaper. The researchers go on to say this about that zone. According to a senior IDF officer involved in the operation, the task is to create a cleansed space. To achieve this, Israel is using a combination of violence, starvation and mass incarceration and deportation before targeting all those who remain, even if they are civilians. As Moshe Yaalon, another former Netanyahu defense minister, has warned, the path we are being dragged down is one of occupation, annexation, and ethnic cleansing. This assessment has been echoed by Human Rights Watch. Of course, it's been clear for more than a year that Israel has no interest whatsoever in the hostages held by Hamas and other resistance groups in Gaza, and under relentless Israeli bombing and ethnic cleansing, they're dying. Israel's defense minister has now confirmed that the bodies of a further 2 hostages have been recovered from Gaza, those of a father and a son. Helena, I mean, it's difficult to see how the role of Washington in Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people could get worse. That being said, I mean, if anyone could manage to make it worse, I suppose it would be Donald Trump. My feeling is that sort of Netanyahu has sort of been buying time, making Gaza completely unlivable until Donald Trump comes in as president to try and have some, I mean, to use a horrible phrase, sort of final solution to sort of, I mean, maybe bully neighboring countries into saying you have to take these people, because I suppose Netanyahu is going to say, look, Gaza's unlivable. You know, even if we wanted them to stay, they can't stay because it's unlivable, and then bully other people to take those people so that, you know, Israel can have at least half of the Gaza Strip and annex it. I mean, it's incredibly grim. What do you see is happening? How would you interpret that statement that all hell will break loose if Hamas don't return the hostages?
I mean, it's been clear ever since the start of kind of the electoral process in America that Trump has been very clear about his allyship with Israel. He's always been incredibly allied to Israel. And there is no sort of sector of his electoral base who wants him to do anything else. There is nobody within his own party who would temper any of his ambitions with what he wants to happen within Israel and Gaza, because they all support the same thing. For as much as Trump seems to kind of purports to be this break from neoconservatism, he never really has been in terms of how he approaches geopolitics and the kind of people that he puts in positions of power who also deal with these things. So the idea that this would be some kind of break from previous consensus, that's just kind of not true. And as you say, like, it's just the only person who could be any worse at this than Joe Biden, who's been giving a green light to the hell that has already been created in Gaza. The idea that would be any different or any better under Donald Trump, I think that was for the birds. And I made this point in the run up to the election as well. With regards to how all hell would break loose, I think the idea that Trump's plan would be to try and essentially railroad other countries into taking Gazan refugees, to essentially give Israel the green light to start a full annexation plan. I think I definitely agree with your argument there. If there's one person, if we see from everything we've just discussed, from his desire to be using both American military and economic strength to try and strong harm his own allies into ceding territory, for example, the idea that he wouldn't employ those same kind of tactics, the same kind of power that he's happy to throw around internally, externally as well, to people who are on the periphery of the American kind of empire at this point, to countries who we would want to see in taking Gazan refugees, to give Israel the space to start its annexation campaign, having ethnically cleansed loads of parts of northern Gaza. I think I would buy that argument. He is certainly somebody who's not afraid to railroad people within other countries, other political entities, other governments, into accepting his will, whatever it may be. He's even happy to break international agreements when he feels like it's necessary for his own political ends. The idea that he would temper those desires because of any reason as for international diplomacy or, heaven forfend, the lives of Gazans or the rights of the Palestinians. I don't see any argument against that your claims are correct there. So we shall see how this goes moving forward. And it's just heartbreaking to see. It's absolutely heartbreaking to know that any small amount of pushback that may have only been done kind of performatively by the Biden administration, because they were clear. We'd seen all of the internal documentation up to this point showing that there was essentially no pushback against what Israel wanted to do. The internal members of the American State Department under Biden, they went to the press. They said things such as, well, we don't actually have any kind of plan. We just let Israel do what it wants to do. And rather than just being a passive enabler of what Israel have been doing in Gaza under the Biden administration, we now have an active and direct complicit government that wants to further enable them and wants to enact further policy that advances their cause even more so than they are doing at the moment. And it's difficult to see how much further this can go when we know that any deal towards ending the conflict has always been collapsed from the Israeli side. There's been plenty of Hamas approaches towards some kind of ceasefire deal. And we know now that he's been shot down by Netanyahu. So it's difficult to have hope as to seeing something positive coming out of any of this.
And I mean, I do think actually it does relate, as you say, sort of to our previous conversation about Trump talking about, Panama, Greenland, and Canada. Obviously, this is far more serious because he's not actually going to invade Canada. right? I mean, Panama and Greenland, I don't think he's going to invade them, but he does seem to have colonial pretensions. But I mean, an analysis of Israel that I always find very persuasive is that this is a project which began in the wrong century for them, right? There are many states, and you often hear this from sort of Zionists, they say, well, you did settler colonialism, why can't we do settler colonialism and sort of kick people off their land so that we can have this country in a place we want? They say, they point to the Australians, say, you did this. They point to the Americans, say, you did this. And they're right? But norms have changed, right? Thank God they've changed. And you can't just sort of proudly do settler colonialism and kick people off land because you want it anymore. And, while Biden has very much enabled the genocide of the Palestinian people, Israel still couldn't just outright say, we're going to do what you did in the 1600s. Whereas Donald Trump seems to be saying, I kind of liked what we did in the 16 and 17 and 1800s, right? It seems as if this liberal norm that settler colonialism isn't something we're fine with anymore. Because the Americans will always try and pretend it's something else. They say the reason we've asked them to move out of the West Bank anyway, and they're just not listening to us, or the reason they're in the West Bank is for security reasons. They'll always have to dress it up as something that it's not. Whereas Donald Trump will, his philosophy seems to be, they're stronger, they can take the land, so why shouldn't they take the land? Right? That it seems like their project can be made much more explicit. Now, some people might say, okay, finally, with the mask off, that means that resistance to this is going to be easier. I'm not so sure, frankly. Which means we're in a very depressing situation.